Mr. Speaker, I'd like to start off by saying thank you to the men and women of our armed forces who put their lives in danger each and every day, protecting the principles that allow Canadians to continue living in a free and democratic society, one where individuals do not fear for their lives based on religious values, color of their skin, their sexuality, or their gender. Values that our previous Conservative government thought should be protected against all odds. And Canadians agree with our position, Mr. Speaker. It seems this Liberal government fundamentally misunderstands the nature of terrorism and the threat that ISIS poses to the Western civilization. It's not simple thuggery or even organized criminality, as stated by the Minister of Defence. And contrary to his belief, it's not caused by climate change either. Terror, the likes of which we saw in Paris last fall, is designed to undermine civilization and legitimate systems of government. At its core, its aim is the destruction of democracy and equal treatment of citizens, promoting instead a brutal hierarchical system of control, including the sexual enslavement of women and children and the murder of religious minorities, of gays and lesbians. Mr. Speaker, this is an ideology worth fighting against with every tool at our disposal. And that is why it is simply unacceptable that while our coalition partners are ramping up their efforts to degrade and defeat ISIS, this government has pulled out a key strategic tool in our military arsenal. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister frequently stands in the House and says his government is committed to openly consulting and engaging Canadians. Yet, why is it then that this government, this Liberal government, has chosen to ignore the Canadian public when it comes to the fight against ISIS and the brutality they're waging around the world? A fight that has resulted in the deaths of multiple Canadians. A fight that has threatened the core principles of Western democracies. A fight that has seen Canadians recruited and radicalized to join ISIS, many of them just teenagers. A fight that has been brought to the steps and the halls of this very House. Now, I know the Prime Minister and his Liberal government are intent on ignoring the facts and the voices of Canadians in order to blindly fulfill a purely partisan election promise. But, Mr. Speaker, 63% of Canadians say they'd either like to see Canada continue bombing ISIS at its current rate or go further and increase the number of bombing missions it conducts. Let me repeat that once more for my Liberal colleagues across the floor checking their Blackberries or sleeping, who are hard of hearing, Mr. Speaker. That's 63% of Canadians, and that's not all. 47% of Canadians believe that withdrawing our CF-18s from the mission will have a negative effect on Canada's international reputation, while fewer than 18% say it will have a positive one. Mr. Speaker, the facts are facts. It is difficult for me to comprehend how the Liberals can be so ignorant to the threat that ISIS poses. Canada's withdrawal from the combat mission against ISIS is a step backwards for Canada from our country's traditional role as fighters for human rights and international security. Our men and women in uniform have always fought bravely against those who violate human rights and those who threaten and terrorize the innocent and most vulnerable. So I ask this of the Liberal government, Mr. Speaker. When constituents come up to me in the riding or write to my office and ask why we're not doing everything in our power to wipe out ISIS, what am I to tell them? Yes, we are. Mr. Speaker, the truth is this Liberal government is not only downplaying Canada's contribution, but whittling it down, and all for partisan purposes. They've said our fighters and our fighter jets and our pilots have been ineffective. Perhaps there's another plan this government isn't telling us about. It wouldn't be the first time a Liberal government has systematically dismantled our military. Mr. Speaker, the Liberal plan for Canada's mission against ISIS has been indecisive, incoherent, and frankly speaking, confusing for our allies and for Canadians. However, pulling out our CF-18s is just one of the factors being debated here in this House. Not only has this Prime Minister left our coalition partners high and dry, he's increasing our troops' exposure to risk. They're tripling the numbers of men and women on the front line. Again, tripling the numbers of our men and women on the front line. Where was that factor in their campaign promise? I wonder how Canadians would feel about that. Regardless of what this Liberal government calls their mission, more men and women will be put in high-risk positions, deemed high-risk personnel. Simply put, The likelihood of injury, death, or capture is high. Again, without a key piece of our military arsenal, is the Prime Minister willing to personally deliver the message to families of our men and women should something terrible happen? Will he stand before those families and say we did everything we could to protect their mother, their father, their brother, their sister, or their son or daughter? Mr. Speaker, I will repeat once more. The military plan that the Liberal government has proposed increases the risk to members of the Canadian Armed Forces while reducing security via air support. And we will be 100% reliant on our allies to provide air support to our ground troops. The Liberal government's plan neglects Canada's obligations to stand up for the vulnerable populations and protect Canadians at home and abroad. And it is a step backwards from Canada's traditional role, despite what this government says. Mr. Speaker, Canada has the capacity to contribute to airstrikes along with training and humanitarian support. The Canadian Armed Forces have been doing so very effectively for over a year. And at the very least, Mr. Speaker, I ask, as my friend from the bloc, who's not here now, I ask that the Liberals leave our aircraft and our world-class men and women.
Point of order well taken. I shall...
Members of Parliament are not to refer to the presence or absence of others in the House. I was offended earlier when this gentleman suggested people were asleep across the way. No one is asleep. We are all listening to the honourable member.
Thank you. That is a very good point. I'd like to remind all the members that you're not to refer to anyone who is not in the room or whether... In any case, that's a good point of order. Continue.
Mr. Speaker, I will withdraw my comments, and I do apologize to the House for both comments that I made. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, at the very least, Mr. Speaker, I ask that the Liberals have our aircraft and our world-class men and women of the Royal Canadian Air Force in a forward position to provide support and safety for our troops and those of our allies. Mr. Speaker, the true test of a leader is when he can stand up and face the people who elected him and admit that he's made an error or misjudged a situation. It's okay to say I was wrong. It means standing tall, using the information now at his disposal to make the right decision, even if it isn't always the right one or the easy choice. Mr. Speaker, it is truly unfortunate that I cannot identify one single leader across the floor at this moment that will stand up for Canadians. Mr. Speaker, not a single person has been able to explain why our CF-18s must be removed from the air campaign. And while we're putting more boots on the ground, we're also putting more of our men and women in harm's way without necessary support to ensure their safety. That's a novel word that we haven't been talking about a lot in this debate, safety. Isn't that what we should be focusing on? The safety of our men and women who are serving their country and the safety of Canadians here at home. I have a quote from General Rick Hillier that I'd like to read, and it's pretty powerful. Every single ISIS leader should never have a single moment in their life when they're not worried about looking to the sky and having a missile come out and end their life, or go to bed and that door blown in and have some commandos come in and capture them. Mr. Speaker, this is Canada's fight. They've taken it to our country. ISIS is committing brutal genocide. They've called for and inspired attacks against Canada, including the murder of 2 Canadian Armed Forces members. As I said earlier, they're recruiting Canadians, many of whom are just kids. We have an obligation to stand up for the victims of genocide, fight against twisted ideology, and protect Canadians at home and abroad. We should never have to rely on our allies to protect our Canadian soldiers. If we're going to send more boots on the ground, then we need to ensure that the proper force protection is in place. So I offer this in closing, Mr. Speaker. The men and women of our armed forces need to know, just as they stand on guard for our nation and put their lives on the line every single day, that we here are fighting for them. Mr. Speaker, it is our job to ensure that when decisions are made that impact Canadian lives, be it during secret cabinet meetings or on a cocktail napkin on a Liberal campaign bus, that we will continue to stand and fight for those who put their lives in danger, those who risk their lives every single day so that we can sleep soundly and that the Maple Leaf stands tall. Because simply put, Mr. Speaker, Canadians deserve better. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleague from across the floor for his question. Look, the bottom line is, the Prime Minister has stood in the House, the Minister of Defence has stood in this House, and has told Canadians that they are tripling the forces, tripling our men and women on the ground. And they've also admitted that they are putting them in riskier situations. Our CF-18s are a key piece of our military arsenal that can provide safety and support. And I don't understand, and neither do my members on this side, understand why we need to rely on the generosity of others to provide safety and support for our own men and women when you're tripling the size of those boots on the ground. Why would we not leave our CF-18s there where they're effective, where they're there to support our troops? And I don't know the General Vance, but my question to you, through you, Mr. Speaker, is that would it not make sense that we keep our key military piece of arsenal there to support our troops? And I want to thank the honourable member from Sherbrooke. I had a great opportunity to be in Sherbrooke, Lac Magog during the 2013 Canada Summer Games, and I had a very enjoyable time, and I hope to come back and visit his riding. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister, the Minister of Defence, and other colleagues across the floor have echoed that they're tripling the numbers of men and women that will be in riskier situations on forward lines. So our message is clear. We are confused, as the honourable member on this side as well, too, about the Liberals' plan. They're putting more members, men and women, armed forces, in the harm's way, but they're taking a key piece of our military arsenal out of it. Our stance is very clear. Leave it there where it is. Leave the CF-18s where they're effective, where they can provide safety and support for our military support, and not pull back when our allies are ramping up.